Yeah. I'm preaching from the pulpit today because I got greens. Just wanted to make sure you saw the greens. It has been said that history has a way of repeating itself. But why in the world does it seem like history just repeats the bad things? Huh? Now, the story of the Bible is the story of God's relationship with God's people. But in this story, all throughout the Bible, there seems to be a theme going on. There seems to be a pattern, and it goes like this. First of all, God desires a world where we are good stewards of our resources, where we treat each other with kindness and love, and where we look after those who are hurting or in trouble, even if they're not a part of our tribe. Secondly, there are some people who desire the power to kill, the power to enslave, and the power to oppress others, and that's exactly what they do, which leads into the third part. The people who are on the receiving end of this oppression, of this violence, desire to be free, and then they are liberated, which leads into number 4. They find themselves wandering around looking for a place to settle, looking for a promised land, a promised home where they can settle down and take up residence, which leads to 5. These settled people then dream about a promised time where there won't be any internal factions, where there won't be rulers, corrupt rulers that rule with an iron fist, or there won't be any domination by whatever neighboring nation is looking to build an empire. Welcome to the story of the Bible. Welcome to the story of humankind. Because not only do we see this pattern in the Bible, we see this same narrative played out with all of God's people in all times and in all places throughout the world. Desire for good, desire for power to dominate, liberation for those under oppression, regrouping while struggling with internal conflicts, all the while hoping for a time and a place where people can live in peace and harmony. No matter what point in history we're talking about, all of these stories involve desires, hopes, and dreams. Now, this morning, what I want to do is I want to make a distinction between desires, hopes, and dreams and wishes. Now, desires, hopes, and dreams inspire action. Wishing is just the opposite. Wishing is a substitute for action. According to Brian McLaren, wishing creates a kind of passive optimism that can paralyze people in a happy fog of complacency. Oh, hey, everything will work out, no problems. No need to get all riled up, no need to stir the pot. If we just hunker down, the sun will come out tomorrow and we will bask in the rays of its glorious light. We don't need to spend any unnecessary time working or planning or struggling or sacrifice because it's all good. Luck will be on our side and God will be on our side. But you know what? this rarely happens because things rarely work out the way we wish. But when we are guided by our desires and hopes and dreams, especially when they're backed up by promises, we're more likely to be motivated to action. So here's a question. If you wish to win the lottery, what do you have to do? Buy a ticket. What else do you have to do? I know the lottery taxes for the mathematically challenged, right? No, you're missing a component. Yeah, you buy the ticket, but then you have to check the newspaper. What did you say, Gary? Yeah, there's got to be a drawing, but what are you drawing? The numbers. Peggy, you got it. You win the prize, Peggy. You win the lottery, Peggy. Actually, no, because you actually worked for that. For that answer, you worked and thought about that. Yeah, you have to buy a ticket and you have to pick the right numbers. Unless you have the machine pick it for you. I don't know. People do it differently. But there's not a lot that goes into that. There is nothing. But let's just say you desire or you hope or you dream of becoming a doctor or a rocket scientist or an airplane pilot or a teacher or a plumber or something like that. What do you have to do? Pardon? Go to school. Yeah, it takes effort. You have got to make sacrifices. You've got to study. You've got to spend time in the field in order to achieve the level of proficiency necessary to do any of these things. A person's hope for the future guides them to act now. You can't wish for these things. You can only let hope guide and shape your actions. So, let's talk about the prophets. Because prophets in the Bible play a special role in the story of God's people. Because they are often the custodians of people's hopes and desires and dreams. In other words, they challenge people to act out on these hopes and desires and dreams so that they don't just sit around wishing things were different. And if the people under their care start doing things that are harmful, then the prophets speak up and say, hey, listen, you don't want to go down this road, because if you do, bad things are sure to happen. See, we get the wrong idea about prophets. For some reason, we think prophets are people who predict the future, that somehow they have this holy crystal ball or something like that they can look into and see the future. But honestly, what the role of a prophet is to simply relay God's message to God's people. And the message in this case, maybe if you keep on doing this, you're going to find yourself in a world of hurt. Or if you repent, if you turn around from the direction that you're heading right now, you will definitely benefit. And buddy, the blessings are going to be plentiful. They'll blow your mind. You do not need precognitive powers to proclaim this kind of message. All you need to do is be familiar with history. Now this morning, we've heard and will continue to hear from the book of Isaiah. Now here's what I want you to do before you get a picture of somebody named Isaiah. It's real easy when we say Isaiah to picture why do we always picture a white-haired white guy anytime we talk about a character from the Bible? Don't do that. Don't do that. I don't want you to picture a single person named Isaiah. Instead, I want you to think of Isaiah as a prophetic tradition. Because when you read Isaiah, especially if you read it in the Hebrew, it becomes very clear very fast that there are 3 different authors addressing 3 different time periods. So you can find first Isaiah in the first 39 chapters of the book. Now the message here is to the people living in the southern kingdom of Judah, right before the northern kingdom of Israel is invaded by the Assyrians. So first Isaiah warned the southern kingdom about the sin of complacency and how their contentment with the way things were would eventually lead to defeat. First Isaiah's audience, they were wishers. They just wanted to hide their heads in the sand and wish that the Assyrians would leave them alone. Now, second Isaiah takes up the next 15 chapters of the book and addresses the folks from Judah who ended up in exile in Babylon. Clearly, they didn't pay too much attention to first Isaiah's warnings because in 587 BC, the Babylonians came in, brought all the movers and shakers in both kingdoms back to Babylon, which in modern day history, that's Iraq. So what'd the exiles do? Well, according to Psalm 137, the exiles got caught up in the wishing game. Now, some of them might have been looking back with regret and thinking, wow, what happened to our wishes? Well, the wish was that the Assyrians wouldn't come and get them. Well, the Assyrians didn't. It was the Babylonians that eventually came in and got them. So according to Psalm 137, these exiles got caught up in this wishing game, and you can hear it in this psalm. The author says, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat and we wept as we thought of Jerusalem." They wished they could return home. But second Isaiah's message to the exile, they were hopeful. If you can turn your wishing into hope, one day you'll be able to return to your homeland. And that's when you can rebuild. And guess what happened in 538 BC? Under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah, and by the grace of King Cyrus of Persia, they were able to go home. So then third Isaiah takes a turn in chapters 56 through 66, and that was all about the people rebuilding and resettling their homelands, which still involves some warnings, but there was a lot of encouragement too. And so when you put them all together, you have the Isaiah tradition, or what we call the book of Isaiah. Now that Isaiah tradition became so important to later generations that Jesus and his earlier followers quoted Isaiah more than any other book in the Old Testament. And then when you take Isaiah and you add some other prophets like Malachi and Joel and Ezekiel and Daniel into the mix, you get a vision of hope that becomes the foundation of why the church even observes Advent. Because in this time between the prophets and the birth of Jesus, the dreams of a Messiah who would restore God's reign never died. But they weren't completely fulfilled either. Sure, the circumstances changed for better while they were under Persian rule, but things still weren't as good as the prophets promised. And then when the Greek and Seleucid empires were in control of the region, things were good for a time. The Jews could honestly say that they weren't under oppression. But then when the Romans took control, things fell apart and went south really fast. And pretty soon the Jews found themselves back under this humiliating oppression. And the humiliation was even worse because the Romans set up this series of corrupt puppet kings who they thought would keep the Jews in line, but honestly, it only made things worse. And yet, although their hopes were tested, those hopes remained. And their dreams lived on too. It remained alive for many people down the road, including Mary and Joseph and Simeon and Elizabeth and all these humble folks who lived at the margins of society. It is a small wonder that Jesus, the long-expected Messiah, would be born in these margins. To be alive in Jesus is to have a desire, a dream, and a hope for the future. To be alive in Jesus translates hope for the future into action in the present, and to keep acting on it no matter what sort of roadblocks that you run into. No matter what kind of disappointments, setbacks, delays, any of those things that we might experience. So, let us begin this Advent season by remembering the prophets who proclaimed their hopes, desires, and dreams. Isaiah 11:6 and 9, 42, verse 1 through 3. The wolf shall live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him, and he will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. Come, thou long expected Jesus.